Go the fuck away. Sir, you...
Sex robot, 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 sex.
So I recently played through Nicolas Cage's Detroit Dumb Human. No, wait, that's not right. Take two. So I recently played through David Cage's Detroit Dumb Human, and it was a video game. Before this game, I didn't exactly have the most experience with other David Cage titles. I know some stuff about Heavy Rain, don't really care enough to play Indigo Prophecy, and heard that Beyond Two Souls was Press Circle to Pain, the video game. With all that in mind, along with Detroit being pushed as hard as it was during E3 2016 and 2017, not to mention the disaster that was the Sony Paris conference last year, it just came off as one of those games that every time I saw anything from it, all I thought was, please go away. Reluctantly, I did end up buying and playing Detroit, despite my expectations being pretty low. It wasn't an absolute disaster like I was expecting, but I still don't know what I'd say my overall thoughts are. There's some pretty good things about the game, but at the same time, there is some really dumb shit too. I'm hoping with doing this review, I can better sort out whether my opinion on the game is more positive or negative. Also, since Detroit is pretty differently structured from basically any game I've reviewed thus far, the structure of this review will be pretty different as well. With that said, here we go.
Deja vu, I just been in this place before. Higher on the street and I know it's my time to go.
So our game begins with this android lady, and I'm already extremely uncomfortable. I don't even know why, but every time I look at Chloe, that's her name by the way, I just get a feeling that she wants to devour my soul. You see her every time you go to the startup menu, so yeah, get used to her being around.
Remember, this is not just a story. This is our future.
Good to know right out of the gate, we are establishing how pretentious this story is going to be. I appreciate that kind of honesty. The story begins proper with the first of our three main protagonists, Connor, an android built to assist with detective and forensic work, who at the start of the game is investigating a murder/hostage situation, but more importantly deciding whether or not to save the fish that fell out of the tank. One of the true moral dilemmas in Detroit Become Human. One thing I noticed immediately off the bat is that the game plays like utter ass. It has nothing to do with gameplay being de-emphasized, but oddly enough, the control for the gameplay bits is really unintuitive. Moving your character is like controlling a tank since they're slow as molasses, and when you turn, it's always at a wide angle, often leading to you getting caught on environmental geometry and having to finagle your way around the analog stick to get unstuck. Not to mention that there are invisible walls everywhere, and the game does a poor job of conveying where they are without the player stumbling around like a drunk buffoon with two left feet. Oh, and the input you use to interact with a good portion of everything is the right analog stick. You know, the thing that controls the camera in 95% of modern video games. Trying to get used to this made me let the fish die completely by accident. Unforgivable. It's so awkward lining yourself up to something that requires input from the right stick so it'll actually register that instead of moving the camera all over the fucking place. Speaking of the camera, that also sucks too. It moves so slowly and at such a wide angle that it's more difficult to get a good view of something than it really should be. I checked the options and there's no way to crank up the sensitivity, so oop. Sure, you can get used to this after a while, but that doesn't make it any less cumbersome. Not to say this doesn't make for some pretty cool gameplay bits. Connor's investigation segment here is actually pretty solid. There is a legit feeling of satisfaction that comes from piecing all of the evidence together, and there is a bit of leeway provided for you to either find out where the criminal went, or to look around a bit more to get a better understanding of their motivation. In fact, pretty much every one of the investigations in the game are like this. They kinda remind me of the detective segments from the Batman Arkham games.
Like, I'm not even joking here. If those segments were fleshed out more and given their own game, I'd totally buy it.
So in the end, I saved this little shit, promised the android he'd be unharmed, and the cops just shot the dude anyways.
You lied to me, Connor. You lied.
You calling me a liar?
I ain't calling you a truther.
Pretty solid introduction to Connor's story, which cannot be said about the introduction to the android characters Kara and Marcus. For some reason, Kara's first moment involves nothing but standing in one place and looking around some store, which I'm guessing is supposed to resemble a slave auction, waiting for your dickhead of an owner to pick you up and take you home. Why even have this be gameplay if there's literally no game you can play right here? Having a cutscene showing the transaction from different camera angles would at least be less tedious to watch than staring at it in gameplay unable to do anything else. Fuck, maybe the player could at least skip that and get on with the plot. Not like you'd miss anything from doing that. And then Marcus's introduction is literally just walking to a store, getting an order of paint, and going home on a bus. That is it. Okay, you can also get called the Devil's Baby by Big Smoke from GTA, and harassed by mean people who seem to get off the hook pretty easily for damaging somebody else's property. But even with those things, that's it. Marcus then has to ride on the back of the bus because why even attempt to be subtle with racism allegories when you can just take prejudicial periods from a grade school American history book, replace black people with androids, and call it a day. Both segments are two halves of the same chapter, and I'm just left here wondering why they weren't cut out or made to be the opening part of both following chapters for Kara and Marcus. All that they do is fuck with the pacing. But whatever, it's not like the two following chapters are any better since they're literally just busy work. Kara has to clean the house because your owner couldn't be fucked to do it himself. Oh, and he's also an abusive dad character.
Now, if you think he'd be an overweight, lazy, vulgar, drunk, angry bum, which abusive dad characters tend to be, you'd be 100% accurate. That's exactly what he is.
He has a daughter named Alice. She is a little girl. That is as far as her character goes. Marcus's next chapter is marginally better by virtue of an attempt to better flesh out both Marcus and his owner Carl.
Croissant.
I actually really like the dynamic between the two. Carl tries to show Marcus what it means to be human despite the latter being a plastic machine, in order for Carl to pass down what he knows so Marcus can better take care of himself for when he dies and leaves Marcus without an owner. It's a cool, believable twist on the student-old mentor dynamic, and I even like the conflict brought up at the end with Carl's son Leo, who feels neglected and unloved by his own father, resulting in him growing a drug addiction and hatred toward machines. Though it's still brought down by a bunch of tedious bullshit involving getting an old guy out of bed, making him breakfast, and fucking off until the game decides to continue. The only thing that kept me entertained in both of these chapters was dicking around with the animations that freeze in place and playing around with Carl's breakfast. Bacon and eggs? Nope. 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 Bacon and eggs? Also, this little gem.
That was actually animated by a human. I know, hard to believe.
On the plus side, we go back to Connor's story after this and get introduced to by far the best character in Detroit, Hank fucking Anderson. For one, he's played by the ever-so-talented Clancy Brown, which is an automatic plus, and the game did a really good job fleshing Hank out as someone who became bitter and stopped giving a shit after having lost his son a long time back. As you go through the game and get to know more about Hank, you can't help but feel bad for the guy, yet understand where he's coming from and want to get on his good side to help him out. Plus, he gets some deadpan snarky quips that are legitimately hilarious.
Why do they make you look so goofy and give you that weird voice?
Cyberlife androids are designed to work harmoniously with humans. Both my appearance and voice were specifically designed to facilitate my integration.
Well, they fucked up.
The whole buddy cop thing with Connor and Hank is definitely one of Detroit Become Human's stronger aspects, presenting an interesting dilemma for Connor about whether he should just accomplish any assignment he's given or break free and make his own choices, in the process affecting his relationship between Hank and his handler Amanda. All well and good, but unfortunately, each one of the following chapters, one after the other, adds more and more to what I'd say is Detroit's biggest narrative flaw. Nothing about the game's universe is believable at all. In Kara's second chapter, her abusive deadbeat of an owner brings up how he lost his job to an android and ironically had to get one to get help around the house. Which, number one, how an unholy fuck would he be able to afford a do-everything robot without getting money from a job? I'd imagine something like these androids would probably cost up to thousands or even tens of thousands of US dollars bare minimum. This guy ain't exactly living a luxurious lifestyle. 2. Detroit Dumb Human takes place in the year 2038, about 20 years away from our current year 2018. So you're telling me that in 20 years time from now, we'll have perfected the technology needed to create some Jetsons-ass robot? Let alone mass-produce the technology, let alone have the androids be as prominent in people's lives as a goddamn smartphone, let alone incorporate them into society as second-class citizens, let alone have them take over the entire workforce and make it extra hard for people to find a job? Call me a nutjob if you will, but I find this scenario just a bit hard to see plausible just 20 years from now, when I'd theoretically still be alive and not even that old. Marcus's next chapter really pissed me off. The chapter either ends with Carl dying from a heart attack or Leo getting severely injured, which wouldn't the stress of his son's injury be even more of a reason for Carl to have a heart attack? But either way, both characters are out of the rest of the game and the whole subplot between the two gets dropped before it even begins. Marcus then also gets shot and tossed into a landfill, either for fighting back in self-defense or getting framed for an old guy having a heart attack, completely out of both Marcus and Leo's control, even though, as shown in the following chapter, androids are, in fact, taken into custody and interrogated by the police. Why not do the same for Marcus? Poor guy didn't even put up any resistance at all. While we're on the topic of the next chapter, the whole conflict is getting information out of the android you apprehended in Connor's second chapter. Him telling you that he killed his owner in self-defense, which, no shit, didn't take a genius to figure that out when doing the investigation, and vague descriptions about some deity called RA9. Though the catch throughout the investigation is that the android has a stress level that if you make go up too high, he self-destructs. Let me repeat that. If the android gets too stressed out, he destroys himself. On what planet does such a design choice make any form of sense at all? Why make the androids able to be stressed if they're not even supposed to convey emotion? Why make the android kill itself instead of something like powering off temporarily?
All I can say is that universities better go easy on all of these androids during finals week.
This happens a few times throughout the game, but only at certain points whenever the plot calls for it, despite there being an assload of circumstances where I'm pretty sure that an android should have killed themselves from what I think would have been a stressful situation. Oh, and apparently the landfill Marcus got thrown into is full of androids that have functioning components, so I guess this universe incorporated computers into society, but couldn't be bothered with establishing some kind of program for recycling components from defunct machines. And apparently the thing on the side of their head is just a glorified mood ring that can be removed. It's a shame too, since there are compelling story arcs within the game despite how nonsensical the setting is. Again, Connor and Hank's story is very well done, and despite the rough start it got off to, Marcus's story also ends up being pretty strong. He ends up as a part of an android activist group called Jericho, eventually becoming the leader of said group. The major decisions you have to make here revolve around the means in which you fight for equal treatment, whether they be violent or peaceful, while doing what you can to ensure the survival of your cause. The choices you have to make here are really heavy and almost never easy to decide on. The members of your cause have their own idea of how things should be handled despite working toward the same end goal, and the way you're viewed as a leader by your followers in addition to how the public perceives you make it all the more paramount for you to contemplate what will happen as a result of your actions. Throughout the game, in spite of the controls being pretty bleh, there are a lot of neat little gameplay bits like the QTE action sequences requiring quick but not unfair inputs that make for some legitimately exciting and tension-filled sequences. There's also these bits where you need to construct a pathway for your character to take, which are virtually impossible to fuck up and only have one real solution, but I'll be damned if they don't give off a whoa, that's actually kinda cool vibe. If there's one thing I can't fault the game for, aside from some ugly-ass film grain and really bad motion blur which you can't turn off because Quantic Dream apparently hates my guts, it's the visuals. This is a gorgeous fucking game with a visually interesting sci-fi setting, really well done motion capture, and some truly gorgeous cinematography. The whole bit in the landfill, despite being unnecessary and gratuitous, is probably my favorite sequence in terms of visual and audio design. Now, that's not to say there isn't any more really dumb shit in the game. Kara's entire story is pretty weak. Both her and Alice are extremely one-dimensional characters that never really grow at all from when their story begins to when it concludes. Not to mention the entire goal for the characters is realistically so fucking simple that the game trying to turn it into this epic, perilous journey just ends up becoming laughable. Kara and Alice are trying to get to Canada from Detroit. Detroit is literally smack dab on the edge of Michigan, and all you need to do to get to Canada is cross a fucking river, drive on a bridge, get a boat, fucking swim. Welcome to Canada, you dolt. Oh, and considering the game's racial themes lack any semblance of subtlety, part of me thinks this whole plot is supposed to be the Underground Railroad Android Edition. There's a reveal pretty far into the game that Alice, the little girl you're protecting, is actually an android.
Let me repeat that. Alice is an android.
I can think of at least 10 billion reasons why making a child android model, let alone some asshole getting one and caring for it like an actual child, is the dumbest thing ever, but that'd probably make this review go on longer than the extended cut of Return of the King. Oh, and there's an android concentration camp. An android concentration camp! I guess they ran out of civil rights shit to force into the narrative, so they had to put the fucking Holocaust in there. Classy. And as much as I do like Marcus's character story, him becoming the leader of an organization just moments after joining it is admittedly kinda silly. You know, when Detroit Become Human focuses on the androids, becoming human, it's actually really compelling. But whenever the themes of racism force themselves to the forefront, it's so obnoxious. Pretty much all that the themes convey is racism bad, which, no shit, you only have to be a decent human being to figure that out. Sadly, it seems to be harder and harder to find decent people this day and age, fuck you Twitter, but still. And I'm not saying that video games shouldn't have racial themes in them. If you want to incorporate them into your game, go for it. But the theming in Detroit is so paper thin and has the subtlety of a brick being tossed in your face. In the end, I'd say that Detroit Become Human overall is just really, really okay. If you can get past the poorly conveyed settings, some really questionable writing, and get accustomed to the awkward controls, there's a fair bit to like here. That said, I can fully understand somebody being turned off because of those things. Hell, I could just barely put up with them myself. If it means anything, the overall length of the game, while I'd say is a bit too little for a full price tag, at the very least felt appropriate for the story Detroit was telling. I didn't hate myself or want to die during my playtime, so it's got that going for it. Unlike a lot of mechanically similar games, Detroit actually does manage to make all of your choices impact the direction the story takes. There's a lot of room for replayability with this title if you do decide to pick it up, and of course, if you do enjoy the story for all its faults. I personally don't think I'll ever play it again, but I can see why somebody would go back to it.
I'd say if you do want to pick up the game, at least wait for the price to drop to about, say, $40. You'll get your money's worth then. And I believe that is everything I have to say. Till next time, thank you for watching, take care, and have a nice day. Oh, and that sex robot at the beginning of the video, he's, paying rent now.
Sex robot, sex robot, sex robot, sex robot, sex robot, sex robot, sex.
He's actually a pretty cool guy when you get to know him. Go figure.